imagine standing on a beach like 60,000 years ago, just staring out at 90 kilometers of violent open ocean.
Yeah, with no compass, no map, and, absolutely zero guarantee that there's even land on the other side.
Right. It is wild to think about. Well, today we're looking at a stack of your sources that prove early humans made that exact crossing. So welcome to today's deep dive, customized specifically for you.
We've got a really great one today. A fascinating mix of materials here.
We really do. We're looking at archaeological records, some really complex genomic sequencing data, and even these state-of-the-art supercomputer models of landscape evolution.
Which is just incredible technology.
Oh, absolutely. Our mission today to basically explore the epic, heavily debated scientific theories regarding the initial migration and expansion of Aboriginal populations throughout Australia.
And, for you listening right now, this isn't just some niche piece of ancient history.
No, not at all.
It is a masterclass in human resilience and adaptation. And it's a perfect example of how modern interdisciplinary science is constantly forcing us to rewrite the textbooks.
Okay, let's unpack this because the sheer scale of what we're talking about is just mind-blowing. We are talking about the very first major maritime migration in human history.
Right, the very first.
To even reach this destination, which was a massive Ice Age supercontinent called Sahul, connecting modern Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania into one giant landmass, these early humans had to cross at least 90 kilometers of open ocean.
Think about what 90 kilometers of open water actually means, though. That isn't like a casual canoe trip or a lucky drift on a log.
Definitely not a lucky drift.
Right. Surviving that requires sophisticated seafaring technology. It requires forward planning, a deep understanding of ocean currents, weather patterns, and, honestly, highly organized social structures to sustain a viable population during the journey.
But diving into your sources, there is this massive glaring conflict right out of the gate. Like, when did these pioneers actually arise?
Yeah, the classic timeline clash.
Because it looks like for years, the scientific community was just split right down the middle. On one side, you have the archaeologists, and on the other, the geneticists, completely disagreeing on the timeline.
Yeah, excavations at the Madjedbebe rock shelter in the Northern Territory found physical artifacts suggesting humans were there 65,000 to maybe even 75,000 years ago.
Right, so the physical evidence, the stuff in the dirt, says one thing, but then the geneticists were using something called molecular clocks, tracking DNA mutation rates.
Exactly.
And they consistently pointed to a much younger arrival date, closer to maybe 50,000 years ago. It's like trying to time a race, where the stopwatch and the finish line photo give two completely different results. Which one do you trust?
Well, the tension there comes from how those two fields measure time. Archaeologists measure the radioactive decay of elements in the sediment layers around the tools.
Right.
We call that reading the stratigraphy.
Just to clarify for us, stratigraphy basically means reading the layers of Earth like pages in a history book, right? Like deeper is older.
Spot on. Yeah, deeper is older. Geneticists, on the other hand, rely on the molecular clock.
Right, stopwatch.
Exactly. The underlying theory is that DNA mutates at a relatively constant, predictable rate over thousands of years.
Okay.
So by counting the number of genetic mutations between a modern population and a theoretical common ancestor, you can calculate how much time has passed. But molecular clocks can be incredibly tricky to calibrate.
So how did they resolve this? Because the modern sources you shared seem to have finally brought the dirt and the DNA into alignment?
They resolved it with a monumental study that tackled the problem with just unprecedented scale. Researchers analyzed 2,456 samples of mitochondrial DNA from indigenous people across Australia and Papua New Guinea.
Wow. And mitochondrial DNA, that's the genetic material passed down exclusively through the maternal line, right?
Correct. Because it only passes from mother to child, it doesn't get shuffled with the father's DNA. So it gives a very clear, unbroken line back through time.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. So by using this massive, highly specific data set, they were able to fine-tune the molecular clock. They basically pulled the genetic timeline back to align with the archaeological one, settling on an arrival date of roughly 60,000 years ago.
So they basically recalibrated the stopwatch to match the finish line photo.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the data didn't just give us a date, it gave us a map.
Wow.
Yeah, this wasn't just a single boat washing ashore by accident. The genetic diversity within those thousands of samples points to a deliberate, organized migration via two distinct routes.
Two routes, like at the same time.
Roughly, yeah. There was a northern route coming through West Papua via Sulawesi and a southern route arriving from the Timor Sea shelf.
So we have deliberate migration from two different directions, which I guess brings up the next major puzzle. Who were these people before they hit the water? How do they connect to the grand story of human migration out of Africa?
Well, to answer that, we have to look at a rather extraordinary artifact mentioned in the research. Back in 2011, scientists managed to sequence the genome of an Aboriginal Australian man from the early 20th century.
Okay.
And they achieved this using just 0.6 grams of a 100-year-old lock of hair.
0.6 grams. That is practically nothing. But wait, why use a 100-year-old lock of hair when you have, modern populations right now?
What's fascinating here is the problem of admixture.
Admixture.
Yeah, genetic mixing. When you sequence the DNA of a modern population, you have to untangle recent genetic mixing, especially the heavy European influence over the last few centuries.
Oh, I see.
Right. By using a century-old sample from a man in southern Western Australia, researchers secured a pristine genetic snapshot with zero European admixture.
A pure window into the deep past. And looking through that window, they were trying to settle the debate between a single-wave migration and a multiple dispersal model, right?
Right. Exactly. The single-wave theory argued that all non-African populations left Africa together as one big group, moved into Asia, and then a branch eventually split off and headed south to Australia.
Okay, but I'm guessing the hair told a different story.
It did. The DNA from this specific hair revealed that Aboriginal ancestors actually split from the gene pool of all contemporary non-African populations much earlier, somewhere between 62,000 and 75,000 years ago.
Wow. Meaning they didn't just break off from a group already in Asia. They represent an early, entirely separate wave of human dispersal into Eastern Asia.
Right. Making Aboriginal Australians one of the oldest, if not the oldest, continuous populations outside of Africa.
But they weren't entirely alone on that journey down, right?
Mm.
The sources mentioned they met some locals along the way through Asia.
Yeah, the genetic footprint shows that as these ancestors moved through Asia, they interbred with an uncharacterized relative of the Denisovans.
And Denisovans are essentially an extinct cousin of Neanderthals and modern humans.
Yes, exactly. We have the genetic echo of this encounter locked in the DNA, even if we haven't found the physical fossils of these specific archaic humans yet.
Wait, looking through these sources, I noticed something that confused me about this idea of total genetic isolation. I recall reading a study from around 2013 that claimed there was a sudden influx of Indian DNA, I think around 4,000 years ago.
Yes, the 2013 study.
Right, and it coincided with the arrival of the dingo and new, smaller stone tools in the archaeological record. Doesn't that completely change the timeline and the whole isolation theory?
Well, the 2013 study you're referencing estimated about 11% Indian DNA in Aboriginal genomes.
Which is a lot.
It is, and it seemed to offer a very tidy explanation for the sudden appearance of the dingo and these new backed stone tools in the Holocene period. A new group arrives, brings their dogs, brings their tools.
It does sound like a perfectly neat historical package.
It does, but science is constantly self-correcting. A much more advanced, comprehensive gene sequencing study was conducted in 2016.
Oh, let me guess. They found something different.
Very different. They used significantly better technology, broader sampling, and they completely refuted the 2013 claim. They found absolutely zero Indian DNA.
None at all. Wait, so where did the tools come from?
The 2016 study concluded that Aboriginal Australians developed these new tool technologies completely independently. The dingo was likely introduced by visiting seafarers from the north, but there was no mass migration or genetic integration from India.
The indigenous populations innovated on their own.
Exactly.
That is such a crucial point about human ingenuity. I mean, they didn't need outside help to invent new technologies. So they have the tools, they have this incredible genetic distinctness. But now they're standing on the edge of Sahul, a 10 million square kilometer landmass. How does a founding group survive and conquer a continent that massive?
Historically, archaeologists argued over two assumptions. You had the marginal settlement model, which assumed people just hugged the coastlines because the dry interior was simply too hostile.
Makes sense.
And then you had the saturated settlement model, which suggested a rapid, almost uniform spread across the entire landscape.
And looking at the map of Australia today, a uniform spread seems impossible without, running out of water. This is where the sources dive into those supercomputer landscape evolution models, right?
Yes. These models are revolutionary. Researchers didn't just guess, they ran millions of geospatial simulations.
Millions.
Millions. They factored in the shifting climate of the time, the topography, and most importantly, the location of permanent and ephemeral water sources.
How do you even simulate a migration over tens of thousands of years?
By creating a digital twin of Ice Age Sahul, the models run agents like virtual representations of human groups across the terrain. And what emerged from the data wasn't a slow coastal creep or a uniform blanket.
What was it?
It was a radiating wave of migration. The models showed people moving incredibly fast, averaging about 0.71 to 1.15 kilometers a year, specifically following well-watered riverine corridors and coastlines.
Basically geographic superhighways.
Precisely. They mapped out geographic superhighways.
Okay, let me push back on that speed, though. Moving a kilometer a year through entirely unknown hostile territory, facing flora, fauna, and weather patterns they had never seen before. How is that even possible for hunter-gatherers?
It sounds like a dead sprint, right?
Yeah, that sounds like a dead sprint in evolutionary terms.
It sounds impossibly fast until you factor in the concept of carrying capacity and the resulting population boom.
Okay, explain that.
The simulations estimate the population of Sahul didn't just trickle along, it exploded, reaching up to 6.5 million people in as little as 5,000 years.
Wait, 6.5 million people in 5,000 years?
Yeah, that's roughly 150 to 200 generations. When a specific region reached its carrying capacity, meaning the local environment couldn't support more hunter-gatherers, groups would hive off and move further along the superhighway to the next water source.
So it was less about wandering blindly and more about resource pressure pushing them forward.
Exactly. And they survived this rapid expansion through highly sophisticated navigation and knowledge transfer. They quickly learned the landscape, identified permanent water sources, and passed that vital cultural knowledge down to the next generation through song, story, and art.
Wow.
It was a highly calculated, knowledge-driven expansion.
Okay, so we have this thriving, booming population of 6.5 million people mastering these riverine superhighways. They are successfully saturating the continent. But just as they are peaking, well, the planet throws a massive existential curveball.
It certainly does.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
The last glacial maximum.
Right. Starting around 23,000 years ago, the globe hits a deep freeze. Average temperatures plummet by up to 10 degrees. Rainfall completely drops off. Sahul, which was already challenging, dries up dramatically. What happens to our 6.5 million people when their superhighways turn to dust?
They are forced into what scientists call the islands in the interior model. The geospatial data reveals a catastrophic contraction. Human territory in Australia shrank by a staggering 80%.
80% of the continent just becomes uninhabitable. That is an unimaginable loss of space.
The vast, expanding deserts became impassable barriers. The populations had to retreat into refugia.
Meaning places of refuge.
Exactly. Specific, localized environments that retained reliable water sources despite the global drought. We're talking about regions like the Gulf Plains, the Tasmanian Central Highlands, and the Flinders Ranges.
Right.
Some of these river systems were actually fed by summer snowmelt, which is incredibly hard to picture in modern Australia.
Yeah, snowmelt in Australia is hard to wrap your head around. So you have these formerly interconnected communities suddenly fragmented. They are trapped on these literal and metaphorical islands, surrounded by oceans of impassable desert.
And the consequence of that geographic fragmentation is profound genetic isolation.
Because they couldn't cross the deserts.
Right. Because those central deserts were impassable, these groups couldn't mix for thousands of years. By about 31,000 years ago, this isolation was locked in.
Oh.
The genetic data reveals that as a result, Aboriginal groups from southwestern Australia are more genetically distinct from northeastern groups than Native Americans are from Siberians.
That is wild. I mean, they are living on the exact same continent, but they are genetically more distant than people living on entirely different continents separated by the Pacific Ocean.
It truly illustrates the sheer scale of Australia and the brutal reality of the last glacial maximum.
But this extreme isolation sets up what I think is the ultimate puzzle in your sources. I mean, if everyone was so deeply isolated in these separate refugia for tens of thousands of years, how do we explain the linguistics?
Ah, you're referring to the Pama-Nyungan enigma.
Right. Today, 90% of the Australian mainland uses languages that belong to the Pama-Nyungan language family. But linguistics tells us this language family is only a few thousand years old, dating to a period called the Holocene. long after the deep freeze.
Exactly. So how does a relatively young language family spread across an entire continent of deeply isolated hunter-gatherers? Usually, when a language sweeps a continent, it's driven by the expansion of agriculture. Farmers need land, they conquer, they bring their language, but there was no agricultural expansion here.
This is one of the most fascinating mysteries in anthropology. Around 4,000 years ago, a mysterious internal migration occurred.
Oh,
A small group of people originating near the Gulf of Carpentaria somehow managed to fundamentally change the culture of the entire continent.
just a small group.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they spread the Pama-Nyungan language, they introduced those new backstone artifacts we discussed earlier, and they possibly facilitated the spread of the dingo.
But wait, if they swept the entire continent, why wouldn't they show up in the DNA? You just said the groups remain genetically distinct. If they conquered or assimilated everyone, shouldn't we see their genetic signature everywhere?
That's the kicker. They left almost no genetic trace. In genetic terms, scientists call this a ghost migration.
A ghost migration. Yeah. It is incredibly rare to see culture and language completely overwrite an existing landscape without massive genetic replacement, without the newcomers simply outbreeding or wiping out the locals.
So how is that possible? Did they just politely hand out dictionaries and stone tools and then leave?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the mechanism is hidden in something totally unexpected. A virus.
A virus.
Yes. Scientists looked at the spread of the HTLV1 retrovirus. This virus is primarily transmitted maternally through breast milk.
Okay.
The data showed that Pama-Nyungan speakers have high rates of this virus, while non-Pama-Nyungan speakers have very low rates. Because it spreads maternally, it proves that maternal lineages weren't mixing widely across the continent.
So it proves there was no mass migration of families intermarrying. The women, and therefore the maternal genetics, were staying put.
Which suggests a behavioral mechanism at play. Sociologists call it prestige-biased group copying.
Prestige-biased group copying, meaning what exactly?
Local, isolated groups likely adopted the language and tools of a smaller, highly successful mobile group because they wanted those technological or social advantages. But the virus distribution also implies differential reproduction and possibly violent conflict among the men.
Interesting.
A small group of men moving rapidly, dominating culturally, but not rewriting the fundamental maternal genetic code of the populations they encountered.
It's like a cultural software update that downloaded across the continent, fundamentally changing how the society operated, without changing the actual biological hardware of the people.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it.
Let's just take a breath and look at the whole journey. We started with a daring 90-kilometer open ocean crossing 60,000 years ago.
Right.
We watched a founding population master the landscape, exploding along riverine superhighways to conquer a massive supercontinent. We saw them survive the brutal deep freeze of the last glacial maximum by retreating into isolated refugia.
Yeah, shrinking by 80%.
And then, a mysterious ghost migration sweeps out of the Gulf of Carpentaria, unifying the continental languages while leaving the ancient genetics completely intact.
It is an absolute epic of survival and adaptation.
So what does this all mean? When you look at all these sources, the DNA, the artifacts, the supercomputer models, what should you, the listener, ultimately take away from this?
I think the most important takeaway is that this isn't just about abstract dates and DNA strands. It's a powerful testament to the fact that indigenous knowledge, which has long spoken of an ancient continuous presence on that land, is continually being validated by the most cutting-edge science we possess.
Absolutely.
It highlights an incredible capacity for human ingenuity, adaptability, and resilience in the face of literally earth-shattering climate changes.
It really reframes how we think about deep history. But, thinking back to our opening about standing on that beach 60,000 years ago, there's one detail in these sources that I just can't stop thinking about.
What's it?
During the Ice Age, when Sahul was a supercontinent, global sea levels were up to 150 meters lower than they are today.
Right, significantly lower.
That means vast stretches of those original migration superhighways. The river valleys, the fertile plains, and the early coastal settlements where those very first mariners landed are currently sitting at the bottom of the ocean.
Drowned landscapes.
Exactly. So for all the DNA we've sequenced and all the rocks we've dated, what silent, perfectly preserved chapters of human history might still be waiting for us down in the dark, in the drowned landscapes of the Arafura Sea and the continental shelf, completely out of reach of today's archaeologists?